charter, did that work? I don't know. Welcome, everyone. We're very excited to kick off this panel on really exploring what innovation looks like on the ground with 4 illustrious systems leaders. 28 years after the first charter opened its doors as a laboratory for innovation, we arrived in a pandemic, a global pandemic, where every single learning environment became a laboratory for innovation, whether people wanted it to be or not. We are now about 8 to 9 months into that pandemic. We have been exploring social justice as a country with some deep and profound interrogations and conversations. And I would love to get these 4 system leaders' insights into what they've been seeing on the ground in their systems and the stories of their systems over the last 9 months. I'm gonna just go one by one, but not spend a ton of time introducing people. Let's start with Truong, who's the CEO of Envision Schools in the Bay Area, who I have had the pleasure of knowing for a couple of years, who is really doing some really interesting redesign in her system. Gia, tell us about what's happening there.
Thanks, Sujata. So I am the CEO of Envision Education. We are a charter management organization in the Bay Area. We have 5 schools, and then we also have a consulting division, which is our spread arm that shares our practices across the country. And in terms of the pandemic and racial reckoning, I think we all recognize that it is both are disproportionately affecting our Black, Latinx, and poor communities. Like, that's a fact. And that distance learning is also more of a struggle for those communities because of access and all those things. So I want to name that as reality and true. And we've seen some really great innovations and are learning so much as an organization from our community. So for example, we've been focusing on equity for the past 3 or 4 years, and really led us to be anti-racist and pro-Black, which means that we recognize issues of race and anti-Blackness, and we want to interrupt it all the time. So with that work, we designed a distance learning program, not for our community, but with our community. So we led a very innovative design with our community, with a student committee, a teacher committee, and with parents meeting every week to design something. And we're learning so much from them, and a lot of the innovations come from them. So one example of an innovation that has happened to us, but that we co-designed, was that our students were telling us, like, a high school schedule is just too much for distance learning. We need to go into modules, and we want to go deeper, and we want to, so we, instead of doing kind of a 6-period day, we have 3 periods. And then they said they really wanted to have advisory where they can connect. So basically, they really led the process, our students, and we're getting some really, really great results because of that. And we're also seeing the strengths of our community coming out that we wouldn't have seen without some of these innovations. So I'll stop there, but that's a little sample of what we've been doing.
Thank you, Gia. We'll have time to go into more depth in a little bit. I'm going to pass it on to Tom Rooney, who's superintendent of Lindsay Unified School District in California's Central Valley. It's a public district that has really been leading the country in innovation for many, many years, and was just recently recognized by the Department of Education with a $15 teacher and school leader supplemental grant for their 4th and 5th years. So a second grant on top of their initial one. Tom, tell us about what's happening in Lindsay and what you've been learning.
Thank you, Sujata, and I'm very happy to be on this panel and to share a bit of our journey during the time that the experiences we've been having as a country for the last 8 months or so. And Lindsay Unified is a district, as Sujata said, in the Central Valley, and we are 100% of our children receive free and reduced lunch. And 90% are Hispanic, 53% come to us speaking a language other than English, primarily Spanish. 13% are homeless, and 40% of our children live in a home where one or both of their parents did not graduate from high school. And so the Lindsay community is a community where this school system truly is a lifeline for opportunity, for success, for connections, and for learning for all Lindsay learners. And we pride ourselves on having built a learner-centered system that was very forward thinking and future focused over the last decade or so, in the sense that in Lindsay, when everything was closing down around us, we actually never closed, actually. We just closed our physical facilities, but the learning never stopped. We literally closed the facility on March 17th and we opened it up for learning on March 18th. We had some things in place, such as every learner already had their device for the last many years. We already had community-wide Wi-Fi that was free connectivity for every learner and every family in our community since 2016. And so we had already built a learner management system where so much of our content was available through, an online setting. But I think our big learning and our maybe our highest level of innovation has really been more about the human element of it all. We came to learn and understand the true trauma that our community was facing. And I know it's not just Lindsay, it's throughout our state and throughout our nation and world. The fear that was very real. The feelings of the adults in the system and the learners in Lindsay and their families. If the school system was the lifeline, the connection to so many things, whether it's food, whether it's learning, whether it's love, and if any way we cut that off, that is an extremely traumatic event for our learners. And so what we experienced more so is that we needed to truly shift our thinking to even be more learner-centered, and not learner-centered in the sense of just the academics, but more learner-centered in truly giving every learner what they need. That's our equity commitment, is that every Lindsay learner leaves our system and says, you gave me what I needed and when I needed it. And during COVID-19, they needed connectivity, they needed teaching, they needed learning, they needed all that. But they also needed to know they were still loved. And they needed to know that we were here for them. And they needed to know that we would help them in whatever issues that they were facing. And so I would say that was our really, really telling thing we did. And one quick little comment, we gathered information from many learners, and one of our learners stated during the facility's closure, this is probably about May, she said, when schools were open, I felt safe, I felt cared for, and I felt loved. Right now, I feel none of those. Please open up. Those are the things that just send shockwaves through our hearts and souls and as our commitment to our learners. But in Lindsay, it's truly become more learner-centered than ever before, because it's about what the learner needs. I'll start with that.
Thank you, Tom. Powerful stories. And I think we will, again, surface more of these later. I'm going to move on to Andrew Smith, who is Chief Innovation Officer or Chief Strategy Officer for Rowan-Salisbury Schools in North Carolina, which just last week got a $26 million federal teacher and school leader grant for innovating more broadly. Andrew, tell us a little bit about Rowan-Salisbury, and tell us a little bit about what you guys have been learning over the last 8 or 9 months in terms of innovation.
Sure. Thank you, Sujata, and thank you for being here with us today. I think on one of the final sessions of ASU GSV, so we appreciate you sticking out and being with us. Rowan-Salisbury Schools, nestled just north of Charlotte, North Carolina, has a unique set of legislation from our General Assembly. It's called the Renewal School System, and it is meant to allow one public education unit the flexibilities of a charter school. And so we have about 20,000 kids, 3,000 employees, and we have really unique flexibilities around personnel, around curriculum, around hiring, and our calendar. And so all along we said we'd like to have the same kind of underlying assumptions and rules that charter schools have so that we can innovate as a larger district. And so I think I'll try and echo throughout today's conversations how those flexibilities have really helped us during COVID and the pandemic and allowing us to be innovative and through some of those practices. I did want to kind of mention some of the things that we've learned through our process. We're a lot like Tom mentioned, we have one-to-one technology, been that way for about 7 years. We have internet connectivity for our kids who don't have it at home. We're able to provide it for them. So we are able to easily move into what I would call pandemic learning. I wouldn't call it what we're experiencing right now. This is an iterative practice. But what we learned was that not only do our students need this sense of wellness, this sense of connection, but that teachers need it as well. And we developed a schedule that allowed teachers to have work days on Wednesdays. That the load through this process was so great, the stress that was caused through it was taking a big mental toll on our teachers. And so we started these Wellness Wednesday webinars because we wanted to infuse the innovation that we've kind of been known for into our staff members, even though there's a pandemic. And so every Wednesday, we had a full staff webinar with our 3,000 employees and brought in famous names from around the country to speak to our folks, to provide some sense of hope as well, some sense of normalcy they're used to hearing from these voices. And that was something we learned was that, and we'll probably continue, is this kind of notion of collectiveness, even though we're all very, very far apart. We also learned a lot about communication and about communication cascades and the importance of communicating in times when folks are really stressed out and everything seems really destabilized. And so we worked really hard to develop communication systems that were iterative, where our principals found out information and then very quickly pushed that down to our parents on daily communications. Everyone knows that when you leave a vacuum, the vacuum fills up quickly. And so we tried to constantly keep that vacuum pretty full so that folks felt confident in the work that we were doing. I'll also just mention that I feel like we're in one of the largest educational experiments in our history. We have a lot of models going on right now across the country. And our model currently is we have half of our students on an A-day, B-day schedule. And so we've done well with that so far, but our teachers are saying, we are loving these small class sizes. We're looking at classes of 8 children, and the attention we're able to give to our students is immense. And how could we do this after a pandemic? Like, how could we make that happen? And I mentioned that to say that these little experiments are going on across the country, and we need to take the time to evaluate and understand what's working and what didn't work, and how the future of education can be informed by this constraint. There's a great book called Beautiful Constraint, talks about what humans do when they're constrained, and they innovate. And that's how we've evolved as a species. And so we can apply that to make education a better space. And now more than ever, we have the opportunity to be policy entrepreneurs. We have a vacuum in the policy space right now. Now's the time to insert the policies that you feel like are going to make a difference for the future of education.
Thank you, Andrew. A lot in there, and we're going to come back to some of those policy recommendations at the end, hopefully. Last and certainly not least is Preston Smith, who is the CEO of Rocketship Public Schools, also in the Bay Area. And Preston, tell us what you are seeing on the ground and tell us a little bit more about the context of the system that you're operating in and leading.
Thanks, Sujata. And it's great to be with everybody here, and especially Tom, Andrew, Chia. I mean, just really incredible work going across this country, especially in these times. So really appreciate the opportunity. We only do elementary schools, so we're focused on younger kids. We have schools in Milwaukee, Nashville, DC, and California in the Bay Area. So it's been really fascinating, not just to it's been fascinating to see this across the country in mask-wearing locations and non-mask-wearing locations and everything that involves. So a lot of things we've seen and learned across this country. I'd say for us, it's always been, but it reinforced it even more, the importance of relationships. We work hard to be in deep relationship with our families. Home visits are something that we do 100% of our Rocketeers and families, and have regular community meetings and parent meetings and all sorts of things to really build team and family and within the classroom, within the school, and throughout our network. And that was really our focus. As Tom talked about, we closed our campuses on Friday, the 13th of March. And on the 17th, we were back. And really what we focused on was, it wasn't about the work. It wasn't about getting work home. That wasn't the obsession. The obsession was, how did we create and replicate the culture and the community and the relationships with our Rocketeers and families? And so that meant things like Launch that we do every morning. It's like a big morning assembly, doing that, but on Facebook Live and other sort of vehicles to really bring the celebration, doing that at the end of the day and bringing the kids and families together to celebrate work, to celebrate one another. It meant pivoting staff, especially a lot of our hourly staff. We started something called CareCore. And so we have that going on now. So that included reaching out to families, helping them navigate the system to get Wi-Fi, to get their device, to access food, rent assistance, all those other sorts of things. If you really see what our families are experiencing, and in our network, we've got around 80% of our students qualify for low income, but we've got some campuses where 30% or more of our kids are homeless. So I mean, this pandemic is very much affecting them, and the story of the have and the have-nots, and seeing how it's really exacerbated their needs. And so how we've really leaned into how do we support there. We've got to support Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Start there so we can help our kids and families access learning and really meet them where they are, and then help them with their achievement. I'd say the other thing that it's really helped us innovate and learn on, it's really shifted in our instructional model. We have much less time. When you have a 4-year-old on live teaching, you know, they can give you about 20 minutes. They're not going to give you 6 hours. And so what do you do in those 20 minutes? What do you prioritize? How do you do it? It's like, you know, converting, making Sesame Street online. And so we've really been pivoting our instruction, learning rapidly, getting a lot of feedback from our kids, from our families, from our teachers. And that's really pushed our instruction, both in terms of our prioritization, but also what is more effective visually and less auditorily or other sort of manners. And yeah, the last thing I'm pretty excited about is we have really been pushing this year around bringing enrichment and dialogue and recess, those sorts of opportunities, but via Zoom. It's really struck us how helping our kids have opportunities to connect and communicate with one another, do it in a safe way, but really open it up so they can talk, they can express themselves, they can dialogue. And so we've been bringing those opportunities online, in addition to social emotional learning and launch and landing, other things I've talked about, really trying to create even more community and interaction and enrichments with our Rocketeers, so they're still experiencing these opportunities, even if they're remote. So that's really where we've been trying to push our instructional model, especially this year over the past couple months.
Thank you, Preston. As I listen to all 4 of you, 2 from districts, 2 from charters, what I hear as a common thread across everything everyone is saying is that these kind of educational delivery systems have suddenly shifted to look at humans and be much more cognizant of human need. And sometimes that's the needs of adults as a human being, looking at trauma, looking at the need for connection, looking at the need for where they get support in their homes that they're not getting at school, and where they're getting support at school that they're not getting in their homes, but looking at them in their humanness. I would love to kind of push that a little further and really focus in on students. We have often been operating on very narrow definitions of student success. Andrew, you alluded to the fact, like, if we could get 1 more year of shelter from kind of narrow definitions of success, there might be a lot of possibility for deeper change in the system. I am curious about what each of you has discovered about how you might want to revise your system's definition of student success. If you had the freedom to do so regardless of policy constraints, and one step you're actually going to take in that direction. So let's kick it off with Tom.
Hey, thank you. When we still have, I mean, when we think of learner success and how do we measure learner success, and what really matters is we still have our, you know, learners need to learn how to read, they need to learn how to write, they need to know how to do math, science, understand history, and really apply, and they need to be able to really have opportunities to go after their interest, and they need to be met at their level. So all of those are elements. So we still have some traditional methods of measuring success, and our learners will still take the state test and, you know, all of those pieces. But we also feel like if we do a true learner-centered model effectively, where you're giving every learner what they need, they actually will perform well on all of those measures. Because as a core, you're meeting them at their level, regardless of age or grade, and you're giving them actually what they need, whether that's more time, whether that's a different adult, whether that's a different tool, whatever that may be. And so, but I think what I'd like to shift, because there's another element of our success indicators that is extremely important, and that's the success of our lifelong learning standards. In Lindsay, we have lifelong learning standards. In some places, I think it's referred to as social emotional learning, but they're competencies essentially about what kind of a human being are you becoming. And there are things such as, are you a person who can persevere through difficult situations? Can you set goals and chart your progress towards those goals? Are you a culturally aware person? Are you a caring, compassionate human being? Are you a global responsible citizen who is engaged in economic production and engagement with the broader global community? Because, and if I had my way, those would be the most important standards. Okay? Because what we found during the facilities closure and the pandemic is those skills became more important than ever before. Learners had to be self-driven. They had to be self-motivated. They had to be able to know how to set goals, chart their progress, persevere through difficult times. They needed to know how to do all of that because we weren't there to hold their hand. And so what I tell people is that it's great if our learners are going to college, absolutely want them to do that, ready for their careers, high graduation rates, and we have all kinds of really promising data in those areas. But I would but I want all of those, but I also want our learners to be wonderful human beings. Because I remember speaking to a superintendent in Pennsylvania one time, and he says, well, we don't really need a system like what you guys have because all of my kids, 98% go to Ivy League schools. And I challenged him and I said, okay, that's so incredible. You must have a great, great situation happening there. What kind of people are they? And he was quiet for a moment. And he said, you know what? They're jerks. They're self-centered. They think the world owes them everything. Everything's given to them. And I said, so guess where your work is? You have to work on the person. You have to work on the lifelong learning standards of those people, because it doesn't matter how smart you are, how well you do in academics. If you're a jerk, or I just use the word jerk, but if you're a person who is not really a person who is giving and serving and providing and living up to your role and responsibility as a member of our human family, then there's a problem. So anyway, if I had my way, lifelong learning standards, socio-emotional would be front and center as what kind of a human being are we graduating from our system and sending into the world.
So feel free to jump in.
Yeah, do you mind if I follow up on that?
Please go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Tom that these lifelong learning standards are really key. At Envision, we call them graduate profile, like what's the profile of a graduate that we want to graduate from. And I'm really also happy to hear in the introduction so much focus on wellness and relationships and like a culture of love and care. But I also wanted to really push us to think that, a lot of those things already happen in our communities, beyond our school buildings and beyond our Zoom rooms, that we have extremely caring families that are kind of co-teaching with us at home, and how important it is to know that they are, the vast majority of our students are in very loving relationships at home and get their strength at home. So naming a couple of examples around what I've seen in our community as, the teaching force is predominantly white, and I think most of us serve folks of color. And sometimes there's an assumption of lack in their homes, but I've seen just great examples during the shutdown around the strength of community. So for example, something that I saw was in our Oakland site, our Black Student Union, BSU, raised, I don't know how much, many thousands of dollars to take a trip to Washington, DC, but COVID hit, they couldn't go. They donated all their fundraising to graduates to help them transition to college. So there's just so much strength in our community, and I don't want to forget that. And I also want to stress that a lot of the lifelong learning standards that Tom shared, which I totally agree with, are things that are taught at home, like persistence and positive identity development, and all of those great, skills in a really, in a citizen is also taught at home. So I just want to make sure that as we are looking at innovation, that we actually think about our parents at home and our community in co-designing with us, because learning, and this is a phrase from Transcend, I think, like learning anytime, anywhere, right? It's not just in the Zoom room. I learned that a lot of our students, and unlike Preston's network, we have high school students, middle school and high school. A lot of them are working as essential workers because they have family members that are vulnerable. So they're actually working, and then they're learning at night after work on distance learning. So we had to learn to be flexible, and figure out who's going to do office hours at 9 p.m. to support students so they stay in school, right? And so I think that's when we have to start working with the families and start thinking about, like, okay, how do we, I understand this need, and I totally agree with Preston. There's a Maslow hierarchy of need. But like all our schools also did a GoFundMe, and a lot of this was teacher-led and student-led, and got all these donations, and they just drove to people's houses with their masks and started delivering. So I want to also think about innovation that is not just digital, right? Like all the skills that they're learning that are aligned to the graduate profile. And then really quickly, so we have a graduate profile. It includes 21st century skills. I'm realizing my language is different than Tom's or even Preston's because we have secondary. Graduate profile, 21st century skills, like collaboration and things like that. And when COVID hit, what I discovered was like all the things that we thought were important crumbled. Instructional minutes and compulsory, like kids having to be there from 8:30. And we used to spend so much time making sure that our high schoolers were there the whole day and calling and all those things. It all crumbled. And the most important thing was our graduate profile. Like we said, this is what we were promising that we would deliver on. So let's keep that solid. And at Envision, we have a portfolio defense system where 8th graders, 10th graders, and 12th graders defend their learning. So we still did student defenses digitally, and every student did it in those grade levels. And then I was thinking, what they're learning is actually technology that they wouldn't have otherwise learned, and how to communicate virtually. It really expanded our idea of learning that is really aligned to 21st century.
Andrew, I know you guys have been thinking about that as well in Rowan-Salisbury, and how you might actually design an entire ecosystem that allows learning that happens in school, that learning that happens at the Girl Scouts, and learning that happens through being the main caregiver or the main breadwinner in your family to count as part of the definition of student success.
Yeah, we're focusing, it seems so timely. We've fallen into things, it just happens. Either you believe in coincidence or you don't. But we just redesigned what we call our directional system. And we decided that it's not just about academics anymore. Academics is a piece of the pie, but it's 1/3 in our world. So academics and fundamental standards, we narrowed down the scope of our curriculum because that's part of our flexibility in Rowan-Salisbury schools and renewal. And so we're focusing on fundamental standards with real life relevance, but also focusing on what we call interpersonal skills, which is, we all have little different words for what we're calling like the same thing, I think. But then also we look at unique life goals, the passions of students, and trying to identify those and then tag those to instruction. And we feel like there's a sweet spot between interpersonal skills, academics, and unique life goals where we can engage every child in a unique way. And so we are building a new accountability model based on that. And so with some of the work around John Tanner, you may have heard of him, we're looking to try and develop a new system, a new teacher evaluation system that honors those three things and not just test scores. Because in Rowan-Salisbury schools, we truly believe kids are more than test scores. And so we believe that and we live it out. in this new kind of directional system.
Preston, you're working with the younger ones. I'm curious about how you guys think about student success and how that has shifted in what you've discovered over the last 9 months, and whether you're actually going to make changes in your own directional system for student success.
No, I appreciate that, Sujata. We think about many factors in student success, from growth to absolutes to their core characteristics or other sort of life skills. I'd say probably two things on my mind. One is we've always been pretty obsessed with learner independence. So even from our 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds, we have centers, and so we expect our students to go work independently at different moments, and try to scaffold that in a way that they may not always be on task, but we can catch them so that safety net is still there, and help them and support them and get them there. This was a lesson for us because in ending in 5th grade, our Rocketeers move on to middle school, and so initially the feedback was, hey, your kids are really doing excellent, but they look for direction. And so that was about 10 years ago. And so for us, it was like, how do we really make sure our kids are really deeply invested learners and are focused on their learning regardless? So even now that's even more essential, right? Having our Rocketeers on a screen, you can't always tell what's on that screen. So we really need them invested in their learning. We really need to make sure that we're honoring that and rewarding that. So I think figuring out how to really elevate that, how to better measure it, is something we're continuing to drive on, but it's really accentuated that need in this pandemic. I think the other thing I'd say is, it is on my mind, this pandemic has clearly demonstrated the inequities in society and how, frankly, they're getting worse, right? They're getting substantially worse. And we know, if we're being honest, we know the status of public education, especially in low-income communities of color. So I think the other thing I'd really push on is, we can debate what things to assess. I'd love to see more accountability. What are we going to do when schools really are underperforming? I'll speak in my world, we can get shut down after 5 years, right? There is clear accountability, and that'd be my push. If we're really, as a country, as a movement, going to drive on equity, then let's debate what those things are, but let's settle on them. And it may differ by location, but accountability would be really profound in driving truly towards equity and truly towards this vision that every child gets access to a high quality public education, regardless of delivery system, right? Whatever the delivery system is, just like public education, and make it high quality, and there's some accountability there. So that'd be my, if I had, pie in the sky hope, that's what I would hope for, because I think the real gap in accountability in the system is really further exacerbating equity, especially in these times.
We've been thinking about accountability too at Envision. When testing was paused, and Alcine Mumby is one of our founding principals and works with ELP now, gave me a really good question. She said, ultimately, we're accountable to our community, right? And ultimately, we're accountable. So how do we stay accountable to our community? And one thing we did right away was we engaged our community, not once, but multiple times weekly over in the summer to design our distance learning program, and ask them what they want for their children during this time, and make sure that we deliver on that. So I just want to be more expansive with accountability. I totally understand, Preston. We're a charter management organization. Every 5 years, we have to show all these things. And I think because we also have a limited, recognized assessment system besides test scores. I struggle with that tension, because I know we have to do well or we will be shut down. But I also know that there's other things that I think all of us talked about that are also very important. But we don't yet have the measurements to actually measure it so that we can say, yeah, we're delivering on persistence, and we're delivering on, growth mindset, or whatever the social emotional skills are that we know are important.
Until you move that carrot, people will always aim for the motivator. So we've got to figure out a new way to incentivize perseverance, those other pieces. It's wagging the tail of the dog. So.
Andrea, I would think that that's one of our barriers to innovation in some ways, right? Because, and it also depends on the state testing and all those things. But we were a lot more innovative with COVID because we're like, okay, we would have spent so much more time on, preparing for SBAC, but instead we said, okay, let's listen to our parents. Let's figure out how we can deliver on our portfolio defense system and our graduate profile. So we actually had more time and innovation to do that we didn't have before. So I agree with you. I want that accountability because we should be accountable to academics, absolutely. But how do we have a more balanced approach to the definition of success that really helps our Black and Brown communities, low-income communities succeed? I mean, I am originally from Vietnam, and I am an English learner. I came here when I was 8, and I learned English, and I'm so grateful for my education. But I am the CEO now, not because of school. I'm the CEO now because of my parents, because they taught me determination, because I saw how hard they worked as immigrants. So how do we add some of that in terms of like a more holistic perspective? Because every student should be able to be a CEO, and and they need those skills.
And I think my comment, Sujata, if I could, about accountability and the conversation we're talking about here is in a truly learner-centered model, the deepest level of accountability start with the learner. Because the learner, whether they're 4 years old or 12 or 18, when they take deep ownership over their success, regardless of their home conditions, their poverty situation, their language, or the support they may or may not have in their life, they take deep levels of ownership, and that personal, internal levels of accountability. What we do as educators is we feed that. We create the conditions for that to thrive. And it's our responsibility to elevate them as learners to truly fulfill the dreams of accountability that they need and desire for them. And sometimes we have to help them build dreams even, honestly. But absolutely accountability.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm hearing Gia saying is that this happens in partnership with parents, where parents are also the builders of these dreams and accountabilities, and how might we, as you put it up at the top, design with people rather than design for people. So how might these new accountability systems be designed with the community, with families? And it sounds like with students as well. Like Gia, like your students are saying, we want only 3 periods and we can go deeper and do these modules. I'm curious if they're actually pushing up against accountability systems and saying too, like, this is the kind of accountability system we want to design. Really curious if your learners are activating in ways that are unpredictable, that were not something you would have predicted earlier, and if they are entering into this conversation about student success that we as adults have been having for quite some time now.
Mm-hmm. One of the other kind of innovations that we're iterating on is we've always had a grad profile, and we teach them in our core classes, but this is a chance for us to create we created a course. And it's the grad profile course, where students are learning the skills, and then they're really thinking about designing their own path towards achieving those skills, collecting work from their classes and in their work, because a lot of our students work, and in their communities, and really kind of creating. And eventually we want to say, okay, if you want to be an engineer, what are the skills that are most important, and what is your learning path when you're with us for 4 years, or if they're with us since 6th grade, 7th grade, what do you want to learn about? And like really create their own path. Because I agree with Preston, ultimately we want our students to be self-directed, and we want them to be independent learners. So how do we like actually redesign our system? And my fear is we go back to normal, and it's, you know, quote unquote, not an A through G class, which is important in California, and we can't offer it. But now we have some flexibility to offer it because of distance learning, right? Like we could offer more than what we would have offered before. Mm-hmm.
We're at the 4-minute mark, probably 3.5. And I want to pose one final question to you all. We had originally created this panel because last year there was a lot of conversation at ASU GSV on charters versus districts. Suddenly we are operating in a whole new ecosystem where there are charters, districts, learning pods, micro schools, homeschools, a whole different universe. What opportunities do you all see for innovation to be shared across an ecosystem, if any? And I will start with Andrew.
All right, I'll just say that I really feel like COVID has been this universal disruptor to all systems of delivery. And because of that, we are all first-year teachers, first-year district administrators. Everything is different. And so in that, I think there's this collective good around doing what's right for kids. And so it's less about competition, it's less about who's down the street from us, but more about how can we do what's right for the children that live in our area, in our county. And so now, more than ever, we have the opportunity to reach out because we're dealing with the exact same problems to some degree, and support one another around a common good. And so to me, it's about starting with that common good and that common goal together, and then going from there to collaborate in the ecosystem.
Thank you, Andrew. Preston.
We have on our website now, we put up a distance learning launchpad. So trying to share everything we've been doing and innovating. We even have a checklist of how to do it. So like I talked about on launch and how to put it together. And so really been trying to share and get it out there, and been connecting with groups throughout the country. So yeah, I think it's just kind of open sourcing everything and getting to know folks and connecting and building relationships. I think is key, and agree with you. It's great to see the choice. I think when we move away from a zip code monopoly of education and more towards choice, I think we get to what Tom and G are talking about. It's centered on parents and learners, which is exactly where it should be and how we're going to get to the best quality and best innovation.
Thank you. Gia, and then Tom, and you guys basically, I think, have 15 seconds each. Sorry.
My hope is, like, I know that, you know, Rowan and Rocketship and Lindsay are all very innovative systems that we have some opportunity to continue to innovate after COVID. And some, you know, there's some policy changes so that we don't just stop because, you know, people want to go back to normal, because normal is not working for a vast majority of our students, especially our Black and Brown students. But I would say our